and welcome to another episode of Immigration and Mobility Decoded. I am one of your hosts, Eric Prado, and joining me today, as always, is my co host, Cecily Nelson. Cecily, how are you doing? How are things going?
Everything's great, Eric. It's nice to see you and get this intro going for our episode today. How was your Thanksgiving? We're recording this right after the Thanksgiving holiday.
Yes, my Thanksgiving was a blast. It's one of my favorite holidays. I think mainly because I don't have to do a ton of traveling because all my family is very close by. So I guess I'm lucky and fortunate that I don't have to deal with or navigate the airport crowds or any of that. But I know, Cecily, you were traveling, and actually before we started recording, you said it wasn't terrible.
Yes, I was traveling and it wasn't so bad. Even flying into busy airport like O'Hare, it was pretty smooth. So that's all you can ask for around the holidays.
That is all you can ask for. And yeah, it's a great holiday. And then usually the days after, just get to see some friends. I don't do a turkey bowl football game anymore. Instead, the group that we do this thing called whirly ball, which is like go kart or bumper cars basketball in a way. So we always do that the Friday after Thanksgiving. So that's part of like the whole holiday now that it makes it pretty exciting. Um, but Cecily, we are here to kind of intro and welcome our listeners to the conversation that we have upcoming with Rebecca Stevens. And she is a global mobility expert. She is the founder of Talent Mobility Experts, but she has decades of experience in the global mobility industry. Spanning some career jobs at some well-known companies, and she was a pleasure and a delight to talk to. Shared her insights, her experiences, um, bunch of great topics that we chatted about with her. Cecily, anything or any highlights of that you would like to share in particular?
Absolutely. So Rebecca did a great job of providing us some insights from running those various global mobility programs that you alluded to. She has an extensive background in running programs of various sizes in various industries. So I think that lends itself to really giving background to individuals in the global mobility space from wide ranges that could be useful as you're looking at maybe some key ingredients to building out a global mobility program. She touches on what are the most successful ingredients to working on your global mobility program, what the employees are looking for, what may be useful for your team, as well as highlighting some challenges that people in the mobility space are facing and how to course correct some of those challenges. All of this is based on, as we mentioned, her various experiences in different organizations and leading large mobility programs.
I think you provided a very good overview, and like you, I was very excited to talk to Rebecca Stevens. Um, and yeah, I'm excited for everyone to listen to the episode.
And now here's our conversation with Rebecca Stevens.
And welcome to another episode of Immigration and Mobility Decoded. I am your host, Eric Prado, and joining me is my co host, Cecily Nelson. And we're both very excited to welcome today's guest, Rebecca Stevens, founder of Talent Mobility
Good
Experts.
morning.
Rebecca, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you. From Austin, Texas.
How's it going down in Austin this early part of September as we record?
It is so nice. It was 56 degrees this morning, so very unusual. We're very happy here.
Are you a native of Austin, or did you move there?
I am Texas native, but I've been in Austin for about 26 years. So, yeah,
Nice, nice. So I do have to ask: is Austin barbecue truly the best barbecue you could find in the country?
hands down, absolutely yes. And
What
tacos.
what and tacos? All right. So
Yeah,
what differentiates the barbecue and tacos?
I have no idea. They're just It's probably you get used to what's good where you live, and then you
Hmm.
go somewhere else and it's just not like home.
Yeah.
But I think there's so much competition in both of those areas that it just pushes everybody to be very good and innovative in those spaces.
Yeah, definitely. I love it. I can't recall the name of the show. It was for sure on Netflix, but they're looking at like some pitmasters, some barbecue pitmasters in the Austin region, and I just admire their dedication to the craft. And like they're not these like fancy establishments. Like a lot of them are outside and like kind of like smaller locations, but these pitmasters, they like show up at like 4 in the morning just to start working and like getting everything ready, and then like that's dedication.
We all come visit me in Austin. I will take you to Cooper's. It's about an hour away. It's one of my favorites. And
Love
if
it.
you like standing in line for an hour for food of any kind, then come here. We can hook you up.
All right, perfect, perfect. Well, Rebecca, I know we could probably chat food. That's probably an entire hour right there on its own. But Cecily and I are very, are very much excited to chat with you about global mobility because, just chatting with you behind the scenes and whatnot, like. You truly are an expert in global mobility. So we want to, just kind of hear more about your background and like kind of your thoughts on the industry and kind of best practices that you might have for listeners. So I think to kind of just kind of kick off this conversation, I'm gonna hand it off to Cecily and go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, thanks for your time, Rebecca. As Eric said, we know that you're an expert in the space, and that's part of the reason we love having these conversations is getting people's viewpoint from different areas of global mobility and how we can present this to the audience in new and exciting ways. So thank you again for being here. I think kicking things off, it'd be helpful to kind of hear how you define global mobility. So it can encompass so much, but if we look at kind of that quintessential elevator pitch, what would you say is your definition of global mobility?
I think in the 25 years that I've been doing this, I've seen mobility go from relocation to global mobility. And I think we're thinking of it as talent mobility now, like these strategic elements that it takes to move your employees from job to job, state to state, country to country. So that would be my quick elevator pitch when my mother asks me every year, "What is it that you do?" Um, and I just told her, "Tell your friends I drive a moving truck and I move people because it's so complex."
Yeah, it's so true that the complexity of global mobility. I find that that resonated with me as saying talent mobility because I think that allows for individuals to understand that it is about the people at an organization and moving that talent in whatever capacity that specific employee may need. Um, can you talk a little bit more about your initial start in global mobility now that we kind of have that definition of that moving forward, but would love to hear about your initial kind of peek into global mobility.
So my peek into, or how did I get into?
How? Sorry,
Um,
how?
how?
Sorry.
So I think we're getting to where people choose mobility as a career. But when I started, that wasn't the case. So, everybody has their own story. And Motorola relocated me to Austin about 26 years ago as a logistics analyst. And it was not a people job. It was moving semiconductor parts through factories and working with engineers. And I love people and I love helping people. And so when I found out I did not have to pay my relocation amount if I found another job within Motorola, I immediately started looking for a more people-y job. And I ran into this woman. Her name is Susan Cubiesa. She's still I want a bracelet that's like, what would Susan do? She was such an amazing mentor and manager, but she was consolidating 38 different mobility policies into one shared service at the time. And I joined her team. And from there, I got all kinds of experience working with executive relocations and group moves. Group moves were a big thing at the time. You don't see those, excuse me, as much anymore. So my initial intro into mobility was starting off in domestic relocation and dealing with home sale and tax and household goods and conflict resolution. And then from there, I moved into client services. And so Dell became my client then. And then I started expanding on what I knew about mobility from the supplier side. From there, I went to VMware and they had a small lump sum program, and I helped build that program into, I guess, what it is today. And then I was recruited for a while. I like to say I was stalked by Indeed for about 9 months, and they made me an offer I couldn't refuse. And I got to go over there and literally build their program from dust up. And what was really great about that is we went through COVID. And how many people say that was really great? But I raised my hand at the time and said, what can we do to help around flex working and remote working? We have all the tools in place to identify where employees are and track compliance around that. So that is kind of my timeline of exposure to mobility. And then the last piece of that would be at VMware and Indeed, I was given internal mobility. So forget everything you think about global mobility and relocation and immigration. Internal mobility is really looking at your talent strategy and looking at the systems that it takes to move a person from job to job. What is that philosophy? How do you decide that you're going to take one employee from your US office and move them to Singapore? And how does that benefit the company? And is that investment worth the long-term strategy for the company? So that's where I kind of come in with a whole talent mobility purview.
That's great. I mean, you touched on those three organizations that you've previously worked at. So VMware, Indeed, and Dell. Would love if you could share some insights into kind of maybe comparing and contrasting those three different global mobility programs.
Oh, wow. Every single mobility program is going to be different. So I think working with Dell as a service provider, and I was on site for like 9.5 years. So I really got to see that program. Dell's policies, processes, philosophies are very well oiled. So going into that, it was looking at constant small improvements of a very established program. Like, how do we do more for less with this client? How do we help them with their policy development? And what value could we add to continue to service still as a client? Um, Going to VMware, it was also a pretty pro, big program to me, right? I think we helped about 1,500 to 2,000 employees and their family members a year. And so building was much different than going in and servicing a well-oiled program. And it was a change going from a service provider back to the client side or the corporate side, and just understanding how HR moves, right? Indeed was a very there was nothing in place at Indeed. So there was some immigration support going on with Indeed from the legal department, but um, going into that program, it was really understanding the culture of Indeed and how do they handle benefit offerings. Because I like to think about mobility as being a benefit. And if you're at a company where, like Indeed, was very employee focused and let's help our employees and let's make sure that they're set up for success. And so I took that in mind when going in and building that program, keeping in mind in the back of my mind that at some point someone will see a bill and go, oh my gosh, how much are we spending? So you always have to keep a handle on the cost, but how can we, from a benefit standpoint, mirror match the philosophy and how the other total rewards are offered at a company. I think that was a fun approach to take there.
Yeah, I think the juxtaposition that you're sharing of those three programs is helpful for people to kind of gain insight into, no two global mobility programs are the same, as you mentioned. So taking a look at comparing how, large organizations, even within that, manage their programs completely different. They all have different needs and desires for the program. So that was a really helpful kind of breakdown of being more employee centric, having these programs really built out in a well-oiled machine. Some organizations will fall in the middle of that, and some will be, on the opposite. So that's a helpful kind of breakdown of those three programs that you were managing.
Cecily, the other thing that I would say, if you're on the supplier side or you're on the client side, it doesn't matter. If you're going to a new job in a new company, forget everything you thought about mobility. Because and that's something I learned a little bit the hard way at VMware. I'm like, they're going to be looking at cost, and I was really taking all of that experience I had learned at Dell, and a lot of it was the same, but you just have to really listen to your client's needs. One client might need cost savings and avoidance, where another client really wants that employee engagement and they want the best experience for their employee. And then another person may need systems in place and processes in place that support their managers and their HR teams better. It's really about going into that new program and understanding their needs and then being able to adapt to that scenario.
Okay, so kind of zooming out a little bit, Rebecca, on what are you seeing as the current state of global mobility?
I think now I do want to preface this that most of my experience has been in the tech space. So we've seen a lot of change since COVID, right? So a lot of tech companies, especially, are hiring remote first and saying, oh, we're going to do less relocation. Less relocation doesn't necessarily mean less immigration support either, right? So I think a lot of companies thought, oh, we're going to relocate less people. It's going to be less costly. We're not going to need our mobility teams as much. And there's been a lot of reduction in those teams. And I feel like that pendulum is shifting back like, oh, we do need that expertise. We do need someone to come in and help, even if we're not physically moving as many people. Um, I know that immigration support and that sponsorship is still very important. So I think that's been one of the big things that I saw happen and have seen a shift in.
Yeah. So, and then this kind of ties along to like the current state. What gives you optimism in this kind of current state of global mobility and what you're looking for in the future? What kind of drives that optimism for you in the space?
I think on a personal level, just seeing so many of my friends and peers in the industry looking for jobs and struggling over this past year and a half, seeing those notifications on LinkedIn that people have started those mobility jobs again, that gives me a lot of optimism, and I'm really thrilled for people in that space. And that's telling me that that mobility pendulum is shifting because even prior to COVID, that pendulum has always been there. It's like if the economy shifts, we're going to reload people less, and now we're going to give lump sums, and that lasts for a hot minute, and then the economy shifts, things get a little bit better, and then people need to move, and then they need that expertise again. So I feel like the circumstances have been different this time of and the drivers, but I'm people are always going to need to move, whether it's any and even if you're not physically moving people. I think the other thing is compliance. Do you know where your employees are, right? Um, are they compliant from a tax perspective? And for sure, are they compliant from an immigration perspective? And that's where we as mobility experts do come in, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, it seems that there can be some high valleys or some high valleys and low peaks. I was thinking of that for a
Yeah,
second within the industry, and we've seen that with COVID being one of those
yes,
major pieces that
drivers.
that really did bring things down to the low, and we're hopeful that it continues to come on back.
I also am optimistic that, I was speaking earlier, we used to be called kind of a relocation industry, then a global mobility, then a talent mobility industry. I feel like this is kind of a push for mobility to become more strategic. There's still that lagging thought from some HR leaders. Sometimes internally you feel like, oh, that's just the girl that moves people. Um, but I do feel like companies are thinking more strategically about their talent, about where they're moved, about where they're located, whether that's from their mobility policies and their assignment policies, or even their flex and remote working policies. Where are your employees and how are you getting a handle around those? And I'm not advocating for policing where your employees are. It's more of setting everybody up for success in that space, just making sure that the compliance pieces are covered so that you can offer the rest of those benefits appropriately and that people are taken care of, even from a just from um, taking care of your employees, however that whatever that looks like at your company. Duty of care. That's what I was thinking from a duty of care perspective.
Eric, do you have any thoughts before we kind of dive into building and rebuilding a global mobility program?
Yeah, actually, Rebecca, I just wanted to maybe go back a little bit. And I just like would really appreciate hearing some of your stories and learnings from that COVID period when you were at Indeed. Um, just because it was such a upheaval for everyone that time. I mean, we're in September, and in a few months it'll have been like 5 years since that time that's it started, which is kind of crazy to say out loud. I guess when all that those first few months, what was that experience like for you? And like you mentioned the compliance aspect, and I know a big kind of a big story in our industry around that time was employees moving to different locations without letting their HR team know, particularly on the immigration side. That can be a big no-no depending on sponsorship status and the visa type. So what was that like? How did you navigate some of those challenges, and how did maybe that experience kind of influence where you're at now?
I think from an influential standpoint, it does make me think about the whole talent mobility strategy, like I've been talking about. Where are your people? And are you compliant? And are you taking care of them? But I think my biggest learning, my initial thought at the beginning of COVID when we went into shutdown was, I've got to protect my team. Um, and I'm thinking all of the elements that we track from a global mobility perspective, we had all the tools to help track and to um, take employee requests to work from other locations. So prior to COVID, most mobility teams were getting one or two a quarter, depending on the size of a program, an employee reaching out saying, hey, I know I work in Austin, but I want to go work in this state or this country where I have family. Can I do that? And we were calling those self initiated moves. And they were really a pain because it was, one off, but we had the tools and the expertise to talk the business through what that meant and the employee through what that meant for them, either from a comp perspective, a client standpoint, how much is it going to cost from your tax, how much tax will you be paying if you move? So when I talk about protecting my team, I raised my hand and said, hey, we have the tools to track this. And from my experience of tracking all of the data you have to track from a mobility standpoint of someone on an assignment, We basically built a Google sheet that tracked those things. And then from a company-wide communication standpoint, we were able to communicate out to employees, hey, we're going to we don't know when we're coming back, but let the mobility team through this process, let them know where you are. And we were able to, you know, um, stave off a lot of issues down the road. Just like you were saying, our H-1B holders, if they moved, and we had several move, some of them know that they changed their address. They had to alert us so that we could file that, but others did not. So we caught that, and we were like, okay, we've got to take some action here. So I think that was what was so much fun at the beginning to go, okay, we have the tools. How can we help? Here's how we as the mobility team can help. And Indeed still has a flex working team in place that was started from that.
And one other aspect that really grew a lot in COVID, just given the circumstances, and I think is still a hot topic for debate in the business community. I guess I'll say. I feel like it's. I really appreciate hearing your opinion on and your side of things on remote work and flex work, because I feel you're much closer to the situation versus reading about it in CNBC or Wall Street Journal, where maybe some of the sources are a bit biased in terms of their views of remote and flex work. So, I guess from your perspective, how should companies view that? Do you view it as a benefit? Do you view that aspect of work as maybe more of a fact of life now? I still feel like it's just a hot topic for debate, and but I don't know. I like I'm a big fan of it, obviously.
Yeah. Oh, that's a really good one. I mean, very early on, we were seeing certain companies. I think Airbnb was one of them that announced we're going to just let people work from everywhere in the world. And the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I'm like, oh my God, no. Have you thought of A, B, C, D, E? Um, it goes back to just like mobility programs, policies, benefits. I think it's up to the individual company and the industry. You're going to have oil and gas, you're going to have restaurants. There are certain industries where people have to go into work, right? I think where things come into be iffy, again, it's in that tech space. We have You gotta also think about the impact if you send or allow all of your employees to go home. And I know people don't want to hear about this, but think about a bunch of think about a tech center that's downtown in a city. If all those employees aren't coming in, that's impacting all of those small businesses around that serve lunch, that the pharmacy that people go to go pick up their meds at lunchtime. Like it, there's a whole ecosystem of economy that revolves around those companies. And I'm not saying that that should be the reason why people make their employees come in. Um, but there's so much to think about when you think about remote work. My team in particular, I had 5 different teams and they were global. So I think I had like 34 employees at one time that were around the globe. COVID made our team stronger and better because we did weekly syncs through Zoom, and we had used Zoom before, but you still had the majority of the folks maybe in the US and you talking in the room, and then other people couldn't necessarily hear. So it leveled the playing field. We did some things to keep the beginning of those meetings very personal. And because okay, let me just also say, when it comes to global mobility, I think those jobs can be remote because most of what we're doing isn't talking to employees face to face, nor was it what my team was doing. So I'm a big fan, but there are a lot of things to think about, and company cultures on, again, how they offer benefits and how they interact already, whether it's going to be positive or negative. And then I had people on my team and they're in a different life stage than I am. Like, I don't want to commute. That's 2 hours of work potentially that I could already be doing. I like my dog sitting by my desk. So, but there were a lot of people on my team that were younger and more social, and they couldn't wait to get back in the office. So I do not have a clear black and white answer for you, Eric.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate you saying that because I think that's kind of I have a similar viewpoint where it's not as black and white despite my preferences. I do realize that like there are pros and other pros and cons and other cons to remote work, flex work, going in, etc. I think just like a quick fun side story that over the last 5 years, like I'm not gonna self proclaim that like I'm an a city expert or an urbanist or whatever, but it has increased my uh desire to learn more about that because to your point about the commute, it was something I never really thought about before, but other parts of the country, that 2 hour commute and how it can just like drain you and like whatnot. You spend an hour going in, an hour coming home, and then you just think about it. You're like, I only have like 3 hours to myself at the end of the day. It's like, what are you supposed to do with that? So yeah, I think that whole period is just opened up a door for us to think and be a lot more thoughtful about certain aspects. But Rebecca, one thing you mentioned when you made a comment that when Airbnb said they were gonna kind of do a whole go remote, and you said in your mind you thought about A, B, C, D. So I want to touch on that because I feel like those could be some key ingredients for building a global mobility program. And so, in your opinion, I'll ask first the five, then maybe if we want to dive a little bit more into individual ones, we can. But off the bat, what would you say are your five key ingredients for a successful global mobility program?
Okay. Um, Immigration. And I think small companies, as they're growing, they may not ever think, I'm going to be hiring foreign nationals. And then all of a sudden, they have this great talent available to them that needs sponsorship. And so it's a big scramble. So I think number one, especially if you're an SMB and growing, have think about it. Think about what will be your plan if you hire foreign nationals. So stability around immigration. Um, then you as an S, and I'm going to go small medium business because bigger companies are probably already established and not building a program, right? So the next piece of that is we're never going to reload anybody. It costs too much. We don't really know anything about mobility except that it's an administrative function and it's expensive. You still need something in place because then you're going to hire an executive who you want to be in place, and then you're not going to have any structure around or any idea what to do. So there are some really basic things to get set up around immigration and the relocation piece or assignment piece of a business. And I would say, even if you think that's not going to happen, if you have something in place, then you're starting off your program with a basic foundation and you're going to hopefully cause less problems down the road. Um, and I think if you have someone come in and set that foundation up, you can have step by step, if you will, steps to follow that HR or recruiting can follow. You don't have to have a big, huge mobility team. You just have to have some partners in place, like Envoy Global, so that when that immigration need arises, everybody's not jumping through hoops to figure it out. So some basic foundation is I think the number one thing so that you're starting off your program correctly and you're not having to clean a lot of things up later. Um, I have had to play cleanup at a couple those last two roles, and I mean, I'm weird and that's fun,
Not fun
but
or fun?
that's not that's not really what you want to do when you're setting up your mobility program.
I think those are for sure some helpful ingredients. Really quickly, Rebecca, on the immigration aspect, um, starting off or even a mid-sized company, do you what professional advice do you have for teams who maybe think that do they need an immigration specialist or how or if they feel overwhelmed by the U.S. immigration system in this particular example of all these different forms and work authorization types. What's your professional advice for them to how to navigate that and just kind of remain calm?
Um, I am still stressed out about U.S. immigration and all of the forms. So I don't know if that ever goes away. It 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 depends on the size of your program too, because you can have a really great partner like Envoy and not necessarily need someone who is extremely specialized and knowledgeable about mobility. You need a good partner who is that immigration expert. So, um, again, it depends. There's going to be that line on when your volume gets big enough, and I don't know what that is for each company, to when you might need an in-house specialist. Otherwise, I would tell people, don't be too scared if it's just an HR business partner or someone in HR, or maybe even someone in your talent acquisition group that can follow some pretty simple steps with their partner like Envoy, so that there is a little bit of work to do on the client side, but it doesn't have to be as scary as you think. And if if you have that partnership, like I said, in place, ready to go when you need sponsorship, then you don't have some poor HR coordinator who's new trying to figure it all out. And hopefully, you don't a ball isn't dropped in that kind of environment. And I've just seen that so many times.
Definitely, definitely. What about cost as an ingredient in a successful global mobility program? You mentioned SMB. Maybe smaller companies are maybe a little bit more cost conscious, but everyone's going to examine their costs. How where does that rank, and how do you? What's your advice on how to best navigate potential pushback or things of that sort?
First of all, I like to educate the internal leaders at the companies that I've worked about mobility and the investment. It's an investment. You know, just because someone wants to move doesn't mean you should pay for it. But if you're really looking at mobility as a talent strategy, then it becomes an investment, not a overhead cost. Um, and there's different things to think about when you're thinking about immigration. You have the government fees. Well, first of all, think of immigration as a cost of doing business. If you want that excellent talent and they need to be sponsored, then that is a cost of doing business. And then you have to look at the government filing fees. Like last year, those went up 30% and really impacted some programs, right? But then what does your pricing look like with your partner? So you're going to have your partner or your immigration firm's pricing plus the government fees. Then when you go over to relo, that goes into that relocation and assignments. That goes into another space when you're really thinking, what's the amount that is spent on the other benefits? How do we look at this? Do we want to, I hate this term, but keep the employee whole? Do we want to, you know, make sure there's at the minimum amount of cost coming out of their pocket? Or do you look at, this is a shared cost between the employee and the company, because maybe this is an amazing career opportunity to go on this assignment. So um, again, not a straightforward answer, but those different ways to look at cost will differ based on the company and the program that's being set up.
Rebecca, any other ingredients in your opinion that you would add to build a successful mobility program?
Yes, I think as a company gets a little bit bigger and they add either that HR business partner or bring in a specialist, is get them training, get them maybe a mobility mentor, because it's just fluid and changing all the time. The world of mobility, whether it's in the tax space, can be crazy. If a company goes IPO and they go public, and then they start offering equity to their employees, and then that those employees live in 2 different states or 2 different countries, there's a lot of cleanup if you're not thinking about what you do with those tax reportings in those scenarios. So there's just so much to think about. Same with immigration. It's like, oh, it doesn't matter if our H-1Bs move to another apartment. Oh, yes, it matters, and that address is important. But someone new might not know that until it became a problem. So some good training and mentoring and some resources for anyone in your company that might be taking on some of that responsibility.
I mean, I'll be blunt right now. I didn't even think about the IPO aspect until you brought it up, like, and the tax reporting on that front. Like, I think that just goes to show there's so much to think about.
Yeah, I've gone through that project a couple of times. And I don't think that that is necessarily um, common, but depending on the program and especially in tech, it is.
I feel like that in that particular instance, it it's you're not thinking about it. Well, let me rephrase that, maybe. It's not always top of mind until it needs to be top of mind. At which point you're kind of scrambling.
Yeah, or until you get a fine
Right.
or fail an
Yeah.
audit or yeah.
Yeah. Well, Rebecca, we've definitely enjoyed, chatting with you, and I think we could for sure probably go for another hour, 2 hours. But I do want to be mindful of our time this morning, and so as we look to kind of wrap things up, what is your philosophy? What has your philosophy been throughout your career?
My philosophy is we will figure it out because mobility is so fluid. And like we've already found out, there's not just a clear cut answer when it comes to mobility. I think this is why I love this industry so much, is because it's different all the time. So, yeah, my philosophy is we'll figure it out.
I love it. I love it. I think that's my philosophy too.
Yay.
uh, so Rebecca, at the start, we mentioned that you are the founder of Talent Mobility Experts, and
Yes.
so just wanting let you talk a little bit more about where you are now,
Thank you.
kind of the work that you're doing, and any other insights that our audience might find helpful.
Well, before I talk about talent mobility experts, I do want to say to Cecily's original question, I think about what I see changing in the industry or what's top of mind. And one thing I didn't bring up was automation. And there are so many good programs and products out there. Well, not so many. There's a few. There's a couple that I really like that you can automate and bring all your data into one source of truth, and I think that's something that I've seen really shift, especially over the last few years, is automating all of your data into a data lake so that you're not spending. I mean, I've spent hours and hours of my life consolidating data from my tax provider, my immigration provider, my relocation provider, and then my payroll team, and then my finance team. And so I encourage people to really think about automation and getting all your data into one location. So sorry I missed that on your original ask, Cecily. But as far as talent mobility experts, sadly, or maybe it's not sadly, maybe it's fortunately, my team, a lot of my team was impacted in tech layoffs about a year and a half ago. And it's been a pretty tough industry finding roles out there. And I've had a couple of opportunities to do some really interesting consulting projects, one for Envoy. And so that led me to really think about what have been my favorite jobs in my career and what did I really love about those jobs. And that's why I started Talent Mobility Experts, because I like all the problems that no one else wants to tackle. And I like to come in, be a change agent, give people the best solutions for their program, whether it's setting it up or fixing a program that's just struggling and no one can really pinpoint it. And then I get to walk away and say, I love this project. Thank you. And they're like, we love you too. And I'm like, call me if you need me. And it's just, we wrap everything in a nice little bow. I get to check the box and then I get to move on to help someone else. So that's what I'm doing right now.
Well, Rebecca, it's been a pleasure chatting with you this morning. Cecily, anything else top of mind for you? Or
No, this was just a great, insightful conversation. I appreciate you rounding it out and touching on the automation because I think that's something that we've seen a lot of, getting feedback from others in the industry of how they can maybe make some of their job a little bit easier with that automation. So I think that was helpful to kind of round out the conversation. But we appreciate your time.
Well, thank you. And I will say I implemented one of the biggest software engines for mobility automation at Indeed. And so I think that that's where my experience comes from, knowing how helpful and how that can really transform a program. So it's just been lovely to speak with both of y'all too, and thank you for letting me talk about something I love.
of course, thank you so much for your time. And it sounds like automation might be the next conversation we have.
Call me, call me.
Alrighty, perfect. Will do, will do. Well, Rebecca, thank you so much for your time. And we appreciate it. Thank you so much.